Good morning. I'm kind of excited about what I'm trying out this morning since we're beginning our summative essay assignment on To Kill a Mockingbird and Courage, and I know several of you are going to be out either with a chorus or a band trip, and some of you are going to Disney this week. I thought it might be helpful to talk through some of the things I'm going to talk through over the next couple of days so that while you're out you can have a refresher and it will help you get your thoughts together. So we're going to begin this essay today, and we're going to start with the quote that is key to writing the essay. And it says, "I wanted you to see what real courage is. Instead of getting the idea that courage is a man with a gun in his hand, it's when you know you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway, and you see it through no matter what." Now, one of the things I'm going to talk to the class about is what is the most important word in the quote. What's a word that sticks out that you think is going to help you before you even look at the instructions? And my hope is that during class today, you're going to tell me that that word is courage. So I'm going to highlight that word. I'm going to highlight it here. I'm going to highlight it here. And I'm going to leave it highlighted so as I'm working, I'm constantly reminded that this is a key word that I need to be focusing on while I'm writing. So, now let's look at the instructions. In Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, Atticus doesn't necessarily see courage as a grand gesture applauded by nations, but rather as those difficult personal struggles that all of us quietly face every day. In other words, and we've talked about this in class, that courage is not something that people necessarily need to pat you on the back for or say, "Job well done." That it's the things that we live with and deal with on a daily basis and that we conquer that makes us courageous. And that's his point. Using Atticus's definition of courage, argue whether Jim or Mrs. DeBose shows more courage in the novel, and it asks for you to use evidence from chapters 1 through 11 to support your answer. Now, this is really important because when you write an essay, you have to have 5 paragraphs. So if you're going to write, I'm going to clear my highlight so that I can slide. Hold on just a second. I'm going to clear this, put it on the pen. I'm going to slide it up just a little bit so that I can get to the very top and have as much room as possible. All right. So when you write, you're going to have 5 paragraphs. And as you know, our first paragraph is going to be our introduction. And that's what we're going to be working on. Actually, this assignment is going to get us ready for the milestone, but we're only going to write our introductory paragraph in one body paragraph. We're going to try to do it in such a way so that you feel the time element. We're going to time our writing on Wednesday, but we've got to get ready for that. So in your introduction, there are some key elements that you need to include. And one of those key elements, and it says so at the bottom of the paper that you're going to be looking at today, and you'll have it when you see this video, your thesis statement has to give 3 reasons for your argument. But obviously you want someone who is reading your paper to be interested in your paper, and you want them to actually persevere all the way through your writing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to hook our reader. And we're going to talk about some things that you can do to hook your reader. Now, one of the things that I'm hoping is going to come up in class today is that you're going to say you can begin your 5-paragraph essay with a question. But one of the points I'm going to make in class is that questions are usually, in middle school anyway, not the best avenue. And we're going to talk about why would a question not be the best way to hook your reader. And I'm going to put not be ideal so that I don't have to write all of those words. Okay, so we're going to talk about why would a question not be ideal. And hopefully one of the things that you're going to tell me is that often, especially when you have a question, students will just paraphrase the question. That's the entire prompt for the paper. Or they'll write a question that doesn't have anything related to the prompt at all. So we try to steer students in middle school away from a question. There are lots of writers that take poetic license and they use questions, but for the purposes of writing in 8th grade, we don't think that's the best way to go. Now, if you write a question and it's an amazing question and it's pertinent, then you'll get points, but it's something that a lot of students struggle with. So that's something that we're hoping that you will steer away from. Another way to hook your reader would be to use a quote that's relative to the topic. Has to be relative to the topic. All of the things we're going to talk about have to be relative. Okay, let's see if I can slide this up a little bit so we have a little bit more room. All right, we're going to talk about, that's not going to work. So we're going to talk about how you can have a personal anecdote, which is a personal story related to the topic. But again, it has to be related. And another one we're going to talk about is you can have a fact / statistic that's related. Again, it has to be related. That's the key word that I want to point out in my lesson today, is that you want to make sure that everything that you're thinking about using to hook your reader is related to the topic. Okay? So hopefully when you're thinking about the first few sentences that you're going to write on your paper about this prompt, you're thinking about tying everything in to courage, and you're thinking about making sure that you are exciting that reader using one of these formats to get your reader interested in everything that you're going to tell them to answer this question. So that's the first thing that we're going to do today. After we talk about and come up with some great hooks, and we're going to talk about several in class, you're going to work together as a group and share some ideas out. We're going to write down the hook that you want to use on your paper. And then the next part of the essay that a lot of you may think about when we think about our DBQ is we're going to talk about the bridge. This is a word that we didn't necessarily use with our DBQ, but it's really important. So in the essay, again, the word that we're going to focus on is courage, and I've highlighted that word for you. And I've highlighted it up here in the actual quote. Somehow or another, we need to get from whatever you use to hook your reader that's relative and relevant and hopefully has something to do with courage, from that hook to the actual thesis statement that directly relates to the question. So we've got to find a way to transition, and I like to use that word. Whoops. Let me get my writing utensil. We need to transition from your hook to your thesis statement using courage. Okay, so somehow we have to get from whatever that hook that you've worked on to try to engage your reader and make them interested in your writing. The hook should have something to do with courage. It should be an example of courage, or give a fact or statistic about courage, or maybe a personal story that involves courage within your own personal life, or maybe possibly a definition of courage, although there is a definition here and we don't want to use this definition. So it would have to be something else. And then we want to bridge or transition from that hook that hopefully is related to courage to something about the actual prompt. So we're either going to talk about Jim or Mrs. DeBose, depending on where our paper is headed. So we're going to transition from that hook to our thesis statement, and we're going to make sure that in that bridge we mention Jim or Mrs. DeBose. That's really, really important, because we don't want to go from a hook that might be related to courage and then just skip into a thesis statement, because it will feel choppy and it won't make sense. We talked about this a little bit with our DBQs. When we did the Salem witch trial DBQ, there were several words in the prompt that we defined when we were working through our DBQ, but then when students actually wrote their paper, it didn't use the wording in the paper. So there was this random definition that didn't make sense in the thesis statement. And what we talked about after the fact was the reason we defined the word was to help us bridge or transition into the thesis statement. But then if that word isn't used in the thesis statement, then the bridge is not effective. So we want to make sure that what we put here in our bridge uses, and I'm going to write this down, courage, somehow, and either Jim or Mrs. DuBose. Okay? So those are really important. Now, we're going to talk about our thesis statement. And again, what I'm covering today is very, very quick. It's not going to be near as detailed as we do in class, but it will be a great refresher and reminder for you if you need to view this at home, especially if you're out on Tuesday. So hopefully this is going to help. The third aspect or component of the introductory paragraph is the actual thesis statement. When you write a 5-paragraph essay, you have to have 3 points. So you have to have 3 points. And one of the things that we're going to talk about today is that the points that you're listing, they're going to be like the buckets when we did our DBQ. Okay? Let's say that we decide that we're going to say Jim is the character that we feel has more courage. So we're going to give 3 general reasons for Jim. So we could say he shows courage when he retrieves, when he touches. Let's start with this one, touches Boo Radley gate or house, Radley house. We might say that he shows courage when he retrieves his pants. And we might say that he shows courage with Mrs. DuBose. So I'm going to use these as the examples. Now, one of the things I'm going to point out in class is that the order that you list, either for Jim or Mrs. DuBose, depending on the character you choose, the 3 basic reasons that you feel that that character has more courage, it doesn't really matter the order that you list them when you're writing your thesis statement, but once you've written them in your thesis statement, the order that you list them in the thesis statement dictates the order of your paragraphs. So if we're going to talk about, and I kind of did these in order because it makes sense for this video presentation, if the first thing we want to say is that Jim shows courage when he touches Boo Radley's house, then in my first body paragraph, and this is going to be, sorry, let me put this down. This is going to be the first paragraph. I'm going to find 2 quotes that show how Jim was courageous when he went back to touch Boo Radley's house. And then I'm going to explain why I feel like that shows courage. Okay? So I'm going to draw a little arrow up here, and I'm going to find 2 citations. And then I'm going to explain those citations, and those are both going to go back to this point. Those are like your buckets. So this is my first paragraph. Retrieving his pants would be my second body paragraph. Okay? And again, I'm going to give 2 citations and explain why I feel like that showed courage for Jim. And then when I talk about Mrs. DuBose, that's going to be my third body paragraph. And again, I'm going to give 2 citations and explain why I feel like that shows courage. Now, when I say first body paragraph, second body paragraph, third body paragraph, in all, this actually will be paragraph 2, paragraph 3, paragraph 4. Because your introduction, and I'm going to show you that right now. So your introduction is the first paragraph, and then your first body is your second paragraph. Your third body, sorry, should say second body. Oh yeah, second body paragraph, make sure I get this right, ends up being your third overall paragraph. Your third body paragraph is your fourth paragraph for your paper, and then your final your closing is paragraph 5. Okay, and then these 3 bodies, and this is what I said a minute ago, must follow the order of the thesis statement. Okay. For the purposes of my recording, this is all I'm going to go over, because again, we're going to go over all of this today, and most of you will be here in class today. So I'm hopeful that this will help you if you need to review it after we go over it in class, and for those of you that will be out for the field trips, hopefully this will be nice for you to have. One last thing I want to show you, and this will be on the paper that you're going to receive today. When I scroll down, the bottom of the paper, it's going to remind you of all of the things we've just covered as well, so that will be very helpful.